We're not required to record these, are we?
No.
Well, we're required to tape them some way, shape, or form, just not broadcast.
I'm gonna have to find that out before June. You know,
So we're not required to record these, are we?
No.
Well, we're required to.
I guess you can go, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
You won't see it, but
I'm
it's
not
there.
familiar with that.
Well, ready to roll here?
Yep.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock. Let's call the finance and public property meeting to order. All members are present. I entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as published and approve the minutes from the December 20th meeting as published. Moved by Virginia, second by John. All in favor? Aye, opposed, hearing none, motion carried. Anyone here for public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move on to the monthly administrative reports. Paul, you want to do the financials?
Sure. End of the year, not much happening because most of the issues are taken care of. All the issues are taken care of. A few highlights though. This month's collection of sales tax was 131,805 year to date, 1,331,259. Comparing that to last year at this point was 1,258,21. So as a percentage, it's up 9.5% from this point last year. Two more payments to go to complete the year. So the January and the February payment now after last year's audit will be considered 2022 revenue. If we keep up the current pace we're at, we could be just shy of 1.6 million when the year is all done.
What do we budget again today?
1.2,
Wow.
which we know is a little low. Early in the year, we thought, well, we might be approaching 1.5 because the end of last year we were at 1.4 something. Nothing new with contingency because there's only 1,800 left. And I want to point out supervisor asked me this after board last month. This 1,800 that's left is the annual $100,000 that's allocated during the budget process. Within the fund balance is still 400,000 there for some bigger emergencies that hasn't been touched. Actually, that's only grown in my time here. This is just the annual contingency that this year we've used almost all of it. Some years, one year we hadn't touched it. So it depends on the year. And all things considered for this year, that's not a big surprise. As far as departments, there's a few things just to point out. Workers' comp dividends, if you look at the admin HR insurance, workers' comp dividends are much higher than anticipated. That's a hit or miss. We've had good years in workers' comp. We've had not so good years in workers' comp. We had a good year, I believe that was for 2020. So we got a dividend from Wisconsin County Mutual for that because we as a county had a good year and Wisconsin County Mutual had a good year. So we got, if I remember right, it was like 26,000. I know that our workers' comp mod score went up for 2023. I seriously doubt we're going to get anything for 2021 because that's the year that caused our mod score to go up. So that's one of those hit or miss ones. I know in clerk of court, and I think it was probate. In the November statements, they're already at 100% of the budgeted revenue, and we've got 1 or 2 months to go. So there's a number of places where the revenue is coming in higher, in addition to the sales tax. So what's left for the year would be, well, we have the November statements in front of us. Next month, we look at the December preliminary, which will have everything as of January 15th when I run the statements. And then from January through February, there's a lot of usually revenue. We'll have a payroll accrual, this next payroll on today's payroll. All 14 days of that is going to be posted back to 2022, which is part of the calculation already. And then from there on, we'll have a few payments. So if an invoice comes for December, we'll pay that in January. That's actually a December expense. And the bigger part is a lot of the revenues that lag behind because we report them in January, we're collecting in February, possibly March. Most of those will then be incorporated into the final statements, which will then be subject to audit. Others will be here in May. I forget the date, so it's about the same time. And then just one more item on Monday, just a reminder, we'll have a loan committee meeting, and that means that assuming it's approved, that would come before this committee in That's all I have.
Any questions for Paul? Not, we'll move to monthly general. medical.
Your medical loss report, through the month of November, we're at 92.5% for, claims versus premiums. So there we are doing well. Then if we go to dental loss, we're at just under 96%, claims versus premiums. So again, doing well. Let's see. As for, large claimants, at the end of November, we're at 8. Very likely we'll be at 9 before the December, if not otherwise. That is not uncommon from a historical standpoint. For those that have seen this before, we can have as anywhere close to a dozen, sometimes a little bit over. So in that respect, we're doing well as to the number of them. As you can see, certain ones are larger than others. That's part of the reason why we have what we have from a stop loss standpoint. Again, I look more towards your medical and dental, which shows us that our premiums are covering what our claims are. So we're doing well in that respect. Any major questions before I go to OT? Over time, for the month, for the end of November, you were seeing, I'm sorry, for December, that was $4,200. I'm sorry, not 42, 27. I was looking at highway total, which puts us at a year to date is 211, which is, where was our budget for that? Which is significant, well, no, which is under what we had budgeted for. So we're sitting pretty well from an overtime standpoint as well. Jail's a little bit higher, human services a little bit lower, and highway is significantly higher because we didn't have much snow for 2002. If there's questions, let me know.
Any questions on anything that Scott's reported on? Not, we will move on to item 7, the Winter Park update and discussion.
I will leave that more to you and Mr. Kunish, since you gentlemen were at the meetings.
Well, just from my perspective, we met on, when I say we, it was Gary Miller, Tom Klein, Paul, Dave Meyer, and myself on the 21st of December. And kind of went over where we are on the issue and where they'd like to get to. And it was pretty much agreed that they were, for the rest of this year, for this season, they're going to try to operate under the old agreement with some minor tweaks in it. And then look at how the year went and then sit down after this season is over and sit down and hammer out a new agreement. The reason being that they'll know on both sides how things have gone, because there's some tweaks about the concession stand, and it's a possibility that they might try to get organizations to run the concession stand as a fundraiser. So they got a number of ideas. It's just that how they're going to work, and then staffing was an issue on the Hill. They have a number of volunteers, and they were going to try to get a list to Dave on every Tuesday prior to the weekends coming of who they would have available for staffing. So that's kind of where we are.
And from the previous meeting, the open issue was staffing on the ski hill, and just confirmation that Winter Park Association was no longer interested in concessions. And those two were agreed upon. They had a list of, I think he said 60 some volunteers, had already contacted 40. So there was willingness to volunteer, and that would be covered. The agreement to say, okay, the Tuesday before the weekend, they'd say, yes, we have 2 people that can fill in on the hill, or 4 people, or whatever it is. Yeah, they'll have the hill covered. If we're able to find extra staff, well, that would be good. So there's some wiggle room for back and forth. On the side note, the the allowing 16-year-olds, 16 and 17-year-olds to work inside is working well. We do have several hired already. I think there's a couple more applicants coming through yet. So that will help put the people who can operate the equipment, 18 and above, be able to help them staff outside on either hill, wherever needed. So I think everything verbally has been agreed upon. The actual agreement itself and continuing through the year is still up in the air, but then again, there's no snow being made.
So
for a while.
weather, yeah.
So the hill isn't open for bid anyway. Winter Park Tubing Hill has been open for 3 days last weekend. Just because they could and because kids were on winter break. So they had 3 days of tubing, well attended. The only issue down there is the lousy internet connection causes problems with the square system. So when they're taking card payments, they had some glitches that way where, it took 2 or 3 times to submit. In the meantime, people are waiting in line, and hopefully that's done after the end of this year. And they do have a booster down there, so that booster is apparently working. It's pulling in signal, it's just not enough. And then hopefully this is the last year that I believe Bug Tussle has agreed to run fiber to the park. And with fiber, then we don't have that wireless issue anymore. And the square system works great when it has a connection. And once that's solved, I don't know if there are any problems there. I think the staffing so far is so good. I think the crunch time would come in February, which is when the ski hill would be open, and when a lot of the students end up going back to school. So that remains up in the air a little bit, but so far so good.
So I'm pretty confident that there will be a mutual agreement worked out sometime in April and May that will benefit both parties. So I think things are going well.
Just a side note, do we have waivers, liability waivers for anyone that's working like the hill or anything like that?
I don't know that.
I know, because everything that we've started this conversation, it's about the revenue side, it's about all kinds of things. And one thing that comes to my mind is liability. And usually if you've got volunteers, staff, whatever it is, that if they're going to be on that hill working, it's just like, you assume your own risk as a participant on the hill. But if you're actually working and doing something, let's say you're on the tubing hill and somebody comes down the hill and they run you over, there should be a release waiver, I would think, that we use in place, that anyone doing that would be signed off.
I'll do it 2 different ways. And that's another reason why we want an agreement, is from a liability standpoint, it's been pretty loose. For those that are county employees, you don't need a liability waiver. Why? They're employees. They're under our care. As for volunteers that are working under the auspices of the Winter Park Association, that's the Winter Park Association. But again, a part of the reason why we want something in writing and agreements is when it does then come to liability, that protects both the county and it protects Winter Park. Because for right now, we've been fortunate that nothing overly serious has happened that has caused some type of insurance claim.
Because that they're going to go from one insurance to another insurance to another insurance till they finally get their money when it comes time for a lawsuit.
Which is again why we